Hi, this is Deborah Clutter. Today I am going to talk to you about half square triangles. And I know there's a lot of people that don't like making half square triangles, or when I was a new quilter, I really didn't like making them. I didn't like making them exactly the size because they never came out right. So I'm going to show you a couple of different methods. I think there's 6 methods for making half square triangles that I'm going to show you. And hopefully you will like half square triangles after this. So I do have a few little projects I can show you that I made. These are all done in the hoop, meaning that they were quilted in the hoop, but you can make a pinwheel with half square triangles. You can do half square triangles and quarter square triangles. There's a ton of blocks you can make with these. You can do small pinwheels with squares. One of my favorite little blocks, I don't know what it's called, but these are half square triangles, and then just I think there might be a couple of just half square triangles that aren't sewed together. And then you can also make a basket block, and these are really sweet. I'm not sure what this one is called, but this is a nice little block. Another half square triangle pinwheel block, half square triangles and a 4-patch, and just a bunch of half square triangles. And this one is also made with just half square triangles. So those are just a few examples of half square triangles you can make. And there's all kinds of stuff on the internet if you want to find other patterns that you can do with half square triangles. So first we're going to talk about Accuquilt. You can make half square triangles with Accuquilt. Now, Accuquilt has a die, and all the ones that I'm going to be demoing today are 4.5-inch squares, except for the paper piece ones. We're going to do 2.5-inch squares, and I'll tell you why as soon as we get to there. So with an Accuquilt die, this is one that I have got from my cube set that I have, and I cut my 2 little pieces. Usually you put 1 piece of fabric, and then you can get 2 half square triangles if you use 2 different colors, and then you sew it together. Now this makes a nice half square triangle, and they are pretty accurate most of the time, depending on your sewing. And if I look at this with my little trimmer here, you can see that it measures exactly 4.5 inches, which is good. I don't have to trim it up. I have a beautiful half square triangle, and I can take all my scrap and I can make lots of half square triangles, which is what I do. I probably use the half square triangles and the strip cutters on my Accuquilt more than anything else. And I take my scrap and I just make a bunch of these, and I'm hoping in the future I can just make a quilt from them. So those are half square triangles using an Accuquilt die. The next one I'm going to show you is half square triangles using a strip tube ruler. So I have sewn together 2 pieces of fabric into a tube. I have a 1/4 inch on this side, a 1/4 inch on this side. And then I have a Cozy Quilts design strip tube ruler, and then I just place it on the 4.5-inch mark on the sewn line, and then I'll cut that. And there is my half square triangle. And these you don't have to do anything with. You just keep rotating the strip tube and cut your next one. And then when you get finished with your tube, you have how many ever. I think one 3.5 by width of fabric will create 10 of the 4.5-inch half square triangles. And if you buy a Cozy Quilt ruler, they will have a a chart for you so you know exactly how to cut these. And it's usually like about maybe an inch smaller than the one you're looking for. Okay, so there is number 2. So now we have a couple of half square triangles, and we have a lot of half square triangles after this demo. So the next one we're going to talk about is 2 at a time half square triangles. Now, I'm sure this is how most people have learned how to use and make half square triangles. And this is what's most commonly in any pattern that you pick up, is to make 2 at a time half square triangles. So I made a chart, and on this side of the chart is all the half square triangles if you want to make them exactly to size. Meaning, I'm going to take 2 squares, and it's usually you add 1/8 of an inch to whatever your unfinished size is. And so this one is 4 7/8. And then you draw a diagonal, and then you stitch on each side of the diagonal, just like that. And then you would cut it on the diagonal. This is probably my least favorite method of making half square triangles, because I don't feel like they always come out exactly the right size. And if I look at this one on my grid, you can kind of see that it's off. It's off on this side. It's not exactly where it's supposed to be. And maybe even the one I cut, if I pressed it with my fingers, I'm not exactly sure if it's going to be, I mean, it all depends on your piecing. This one actually looks a little bit better so far. You can also take your strip tube ruler, or another method, if you have something else to trim half square triangles, you can use that to trim it down. And I can see just a little bit that it might be needed some trimming, but really it's not going to be perfect. But unless you have perfect piecing, some people do. So that's 2 at a time half square triangles, and those are using the exact measurement. So you're going to add 1/8 of an inch to whatever your unfinished size is. So if you want 4 1/2, you're going to have to make squares that are 4 7/8. So you're going to have to cut as perfect of a square as you can. Now, the way I'd rather do it is to give myself some room. And that way you can just trim it down. So this one was made by using the chart on the right, and I increased the size to 5 1/4. So I've gave myself 3/8 of an inch room so that I can trim these down. And so you would just cut these in half, and then you would take your trimming ruler, whatever you have, and you would trim these down. And then you're going to get a more accurate half square triangle when you do this, and I think you're going to be much happier about it, and you're not going to be like, oh, I hate those. I'm not doing any half square triangles, because this is going to give you exactly what you need, and it's going to be precise after you're finished. No matter if you kind of wobbled your seam a little bit as you were stitching. So those are all the 2 at a time half square triangles, and all these PDFs will be in the description. You can download those and use them. And if you do find a mistake, let me know. I don't have anybody proofreading these, so let me know if you do see any mistakes in my PDF. So the next half square triangles we're going to talk about are 4 at a time half square triangles. Now, these are really convenient if you have a quilt block that you want to make 4 half square triangles. So like this one has 4 of them, all the same color. These are actually 8 but there's 4 of these that are all the same color. So you could use this method to make your half square triangles. So on this side, there's a chart for making them to size. I think you're still going to have to trim them just a little bit. But if you prefer to do it that way, then that's cool. You can do it that way. So in my example, I have took a square. So for instance, for a 4.5 inch half square triangle, which we're making, I have made a 6 7/8 inch square, and I sewed around the whole sides of the square and closed it. So there's no opening to the square. So you're going to cut on the diagonal twice. So let me show you how that works. So I'm going to cut it from this corner to this corner. Then I'm going to rotate it, and I should probably have a rotating mat, but I don't actually have one right this second. And then you're going to cut on the diagonal again. Now, the only problem with making half square triangles this way is that they are going to be on the bias. So all of these edges are on the bias, so you have to make sure you don't stretch them when you iron them. But after you're finished, you should have a block that looks like this. And if I put it on my grid right here, I can see that it is 4.5 inches, and it actually came out pretty good. The size came out pretty good, and it doesn't look like I made any mistakes. But that doesn't mean you can make a whole bunch of them, and half of them are going to be 4.5 and half of them are going to be less than that. So just depends. So you can make them from the chart exactly to size and not have to trim them down. Or you can use the other side of the chart and you can trim your half square triangles down. So in this example, I have made 4 at a time, and these ones are oversized. And I have done the same thing. I sewed completely around the square 1/4 of an inch, and then I cut it on the diagonal, and it gave me 4 half square triangles. And then you're going to have to trim them down to 4.5 inches. So here's one that came out of that square. And I would just put it on whatever trimming tool I have. I feel this one is probably the easiest, and I can do multiple sizes on this one, even though I can't cut at that angle very well. And then just trim them down. And you're going to have like this much waste, and it's not very much. So if you want to give yourself a little wiggle room and not have to worry about, did I sew that perfectly, then I would do the half square triangles that are on this side of the chart. And this will give you, let me see, looks like about 3/8 of an inch wiggle room, so that you can trim them down. So those are 4 at a time. So next, we're going to do 8 at a time half square triangles. So this chart, same as the last chart, you're going to have half square triangles on this side that are to size, and half square triangles on this side that are oversized that you can trim down. I did not check every size as I was making this diagram. I didn't physically cut these. I checked them in my AutoCAD program. So if you do find a mistake, please let me know. So for 8 at a time, the ones that are cut to square are going to look like this. You're going to take your square, and in this case, it's 9 3/4. You're going to draw a line on the diagonal both ways, and then you're going to sew on the diagonal both ways. And then you're going to take your ruler, and you probably want to use a straight ruler like this so that you can kind of get it straight on the bottom and straight on the top. And then you're going to cut this way. And I would cut the center ones and the side ones first, because if it comes apart and you need to cut them individually, you're not going to be able to do it if you don't cut these first. So cut these first and just try to get it as straight as possible. And this is what I mean. Now I can take these and cut them individually, and so I don't have to sit there and try to keep them all together when I'm cutting them. I can just cut them like this, and then I have a half square triangle that I can use my strip tube ruler or whatever other trimming method I have, or trimming tool, and I can check it and see it is exactly sort of 4.5 inches. There's a little wiggle room, not really, but like that's what's left. But this also depends on your sewing machine. If I sewed this same block on my baby lock, it would be smaller. I sewed these on my Bernina. My Bernina has a better 1/4 inch. It has a scant 1/4 inch. My baby lock, I have to adjust it to get a scant 1/4 inch, and it never quite does what I want it to. The Bernina, it works a little bit better. So it all depends on your sewing machine, whether you're going to get one that is exactly to size or if it's going to be undersized. So that's the chance you take by using the chart on the left, because you're going to try to make them to size, and then this is where most people get upset because their half square triangle didn't quite turn out like they wanted. It's not the right size or whatever. Save yourself some trouble. Trim them down. I used to hate trimming everything down, and then I thought, well, I'm going to try it. I always thought it was an extra step, and I didn't want to have to do one more thing, right? But it's much easier, and it saves you a lot of hassle and a lot of, tears or whatever. Just, trim them down. Just give it a try. I like making half square triangles like this. I think it's easy. If you need 8 of them, this is probably the best method for you. If you need more, the strip tube ruler works great, because you can make, well, for 4.5 inches, you can make 10 of them out of a width of fabric. So it just depends on how many you need and what's going to give you the most half square triangles for your project at one time. And then you're not having to do them one at a time or 2 at a time, or, if you want to, that's okay. So this one is half square triangles. Same, we have our square, but this square is going to be 9 inches, so it's a 1/4 inch bigger than the other one that we just looked at. So this one is a trim down, and these are going to be easy. You're going to have 8 of them, and you just take your trimming tool and trim them down. And so if you don't really like trimming and you would rather make them to the size you want them, then you might try just using the strip tube ruler, because you cut it, you're done. You don't have to do anything else except for press them. And then you have a nice half square triangle that is exactly the size you need it. So that's 8 at a time. All 3 of these PDFs will be included in the description. So just go to the description and click the download and download the PDF, and it has the instructions for you. So the last one I want to talk about is paper piecing. You can paper piece your half square triangles. You can paper piece just about anything. But once you get to like 4 inches or 4.5 inches, you're only going to get 2. Like you're making 2 at a time half square triangles if you're trying to print it out on this size paper. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to do it that way. Now for smaller half square triangles, it works great, because you can make like 1 inch, 2.5 inch, or whatever size, really, really small ones if you want, by paper piecing it. And so this paper piece, I will include the sizes up to 4 inches, 4.5 inches for you in the PDF if you want to try this method. So here is my paper piece pattern. And let me see, this one is 3.5 inches, and you can actually get 4 out of this. But once you get to 4.5 inches, it's just one. That's all you can fit on the piece of paper. So they do make rolls. There are companies that sell half square triangles by the roll, and they're paper pieced, and you can use those to make half square triangles. Now this one is for 2.5 inches, and the diagram shows that you need to follow all the dashed lines on here and sew those. So all the dashed lines on both sides of the solid lines, and then you're going to trim it all the way around. And then once you get it trimmed all the way around, you're going to cut these all on the bold lines, the solid lines, and then you'll have a bunch of ones that look like this. And then after you cut it, it's going to have these little, where these squares are, that's where you need to trim for the angle so it doesn't show on the front. So it just kind of makes it easy. And if you put your light fabric on top, you can use it to press your half square triangles. So you would just go around and cut these on the solid line. And then, of course, keep cutting them. And then you have to cut them one more time. So there's a lot of trimming. But these are going to come out exactly the size you want. And so here is the line that you need to cut at an angle, so that when you turn it, you're going to have, so if you ironed it just right now, it's going to automatically want to go to the dark side. And I do find it kind of interesting that it's still showing right there, but you can trim it. So I would just leave the paper on, iron them, and then pull the paper off after you iron them, because it just makes it easy to iron them that way. So you can just, put it down and iron it. So if you want to try paper piecing half square triangles, it's really easy. You just got to follow the dashed lines, sew on the dashed lines, and cut on the bold lines. Make sure you trim all the way around first, and then start cutting them in half. So those are all the different ways. I'm going to have a pile of half square triangles after this demo. Those are all the ways you can make half square triangles. And I hope you like this, and please refer to the diagram when you're making your half square triangles, and try all the different ways. You find the one you like. And sometimes you're going to mix it up. Sometimes you might just need 2 half square triangles, or 4 half square triangles, and you're going to use one of those methods to produce exactly the amount you need. So give this a try and let me know. Give me a comment. Leave me a comment, like my video so that other people can see it. I really appreciate it.